Okay, so usually function headers are where we're going to have references for variables. So it's not, the parameter is not going to be a copy of the argument that you put into a function. It's just going to be a reference to the argument that the person enters. And then any change to the reference will be the same as changing the original. And that's the big idea we're talking about. If you change A or you change B, both of them change at the same time. So that's called passing by reference. And so that lets the parameter share the source of the same input. Before, what we had been doing was passing by value, where we directly tell it the number to use. Here, we're going to do a reference to a different box. And by doing it that way, it slightly improves performance because you're saving computing time by not creating a separate box. So here is a program that will do that here. So we got our typical headers here. We have a void right here. We're going to increase this by a certain percentage. Here I'm going to do a reference to a float called value. So the first thing is just going to refer to whatever the person types in. When I actually call this, it's going to be savings balance 1000. So when this function is called, it's going to refer to savings balance. It's not going to copy it. It's just going to say this box is the same name as that. That's all right. And then what we'll do is we'll have a float. This we're going to pass by value like we did before. Here we're going to have a value. We're going to add an amount where we do value times, and we're going to add 10% is what this does. So then what we do, we've got a balance of $1,000. We're going to output the balance. And then we're going to increase the percentage. We're going to increase it by 10% and then output what the new balance is. So basically, it's going to add $100, which is 10% of my money. So we got 1,000, 1,100.
So the value of savings balance is no longer 1,000. It's been changed like permanently.
Yes, and because this is a reference, because what the function does is it changes value. So value is a reference. It's like B, which is the same name as savings balance. And when the function changes value, it changes savings balance at the same time. Yes, it will. So in the main program, I've got something called savings balance, and that there's a box called savings balance, and it has 1,000 in it. Before, what we always did, and if we left off this ampersand before, what it does is if we leave that off, it'll make a new box called value, and it'll have a different 1,000 in it. So this is what we had been doing. And so there are two different boxes, both of which have 1,000 in them. And then what the compiler does in this version is it changes value to 1,100. And then what it'll do is it'll actually copy that back over. That's what the return does. It copies it back over and outputs balance.
How come you didn't use the return value? Why do you make it a void?
Well, so actually, here's the interesting thing. Because there's no return value, when I declare 1,000 up here and then output 1,000 and output balance down here, since there's no return value, the variable savings balance hasn't been changed. There's a third one called value. That's what actually has 1,100 in it. Now, if we did return value, oh, and I need to This actually needs to have a variable type. And actually, it's still, I would actually have to, I'd have to really change the architecture of this program to do that. But, because basically, because this now has to be 1,000. Yeah, you'd have to completely gut gut the program. But the reason I don't have to do that is because I don't have to have a return value, because the program like this version where I pass by reference, it's using only one box. And this, when I call the function here, it's saying, look over in this box. Don't make a new box. Just look at this box I've already made. Look in that box, see what's there, change it. And then on the next line, I'm going to output the changed value of whatever the function did to my box. Does that make sense? In this case, yes. Because what it's doing, the function, it's passing by a reference. So it's looking in the box and it is changing what's in the box directly. And before, what we were always doing, and if you restructured this program with a return value, what you would have to do is you'd make a copy, change it, then copy it back, and then you'd have to then output the changed copy. So if we didn't use a reference, you'd have two separate boxes that are value and balance. All the function does is it changes value. And so you would have to have an extra step in your program to set balance equal to value after you change it. And so what this lets us do is this is saying, here I'm calling the function because the program is going to start by the main function first. This is where when the compiler runs, this is what it's going to do. And so I'm saying, hey compiler, give me a box called balance and put 1,000 in it. And it'll be like, right on. And then I'm saying, hey, can you tell me what was in that box? And it'll be like, right on, bro, it's 1,000. I'm like, sweet. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to call this function. And he's like, oh, okay, that means you want me to go up here. And I'm like, yes, that's what I want you to do. So I'm calling this function. You're going to look up here because it's like, hey, that's this thing. I know what that is. So this box called balance, this function is just going to look at whatever box I tell it to look at. I'm going to also call, this function will call the box value. It could have been called balance. It could have been called amount. It could have been called total, whatever I chose to call it, but value will be a different name for the same box of whatever box I tell it to go look at. And so it's going to look in that box, and it's going to look in this box. And what it does is it changes value. And since I'm changing value, it will also change the original box that I'm referring it to. And then this is why this is common for, this is why doing references is common for functions, because what you're doing is the function is saying value is another name for whatever box they give you. And then you're just going to change value, and that'll carry over, that'll carry on through, so that whatever name they gave it, which will be different, whatever name they gave will update automatically at the same time. And you don't have to have a return statement that then gets copied back over
You
there.
need a return statement if you did like y equals that, increase percentage savings balance. Or if we can make a variable equals both ways.
You would have to have, so, yeah, I mean, let's think about how we do, so yeah, we could do float y. And then you could say y equals that, and then you could see out y, and then this would need to be,
Like y is basically a copy of that.
yes. So let's try this and see if it does. Okay, so that, okay, that worked. So it wasn't that hard, but, and actually it actually worked both ways, but, yeah, so there. So what this program does, I've made a box called balance. The function is copying that box, making its own box called value, and then it's returning value. And then what I have to do is make a different copy, a third box now called y, and then that box is holding the copy of the output of the function. So you're basically doing the same thing, but it's requiring 3 times as many boxes as if you pass the reference, because it's just one box that whole time with just 2 different names.
It's not changing the original value, it's making another copy of it.
Yes, and that's what this program is doing without the reference. It's making copies of copies, and yeah. Now what we're doing is not like super intense for processing terms, but you know, if you think big picture wise, you know, if you've got a mega program for a database that has to do something to 100 values or something, and you're tripling that to do 300 because you're going to copy it, change it, copy it back, you can easily see how that can kind of slow down performance. So, but that's what the reference does for you. You don't have to return a value. It's just changing, the reference is changing the original box that I passed the name to.